It's Benji Cole, son of Al Cole from CBS Radio and host of People of Distinction, the talk that gives an in-depth view of some of the most dynamic, intelligent, and successful people on the planet. Run to our website, peopleofdistinction.org for more info, or you can always email me directly at benji@alcoleenterprises.com. And on the line with us today, we have Dan Sherwood. We'll be discussing his fantastic book, The Scars You Don't See, Moving Beyond the Challenges of a Dysfunctional Family. Available for purchase through Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and also, guys, be on the lookout. There is an audiobook created for this narrative as well, and that's going to be available through audible.com in the very near future. So make sure you're checking in frequently to get the copy of the audiobook. And I will say, Dan was brought to our network, People of Distinction, today by some of the best movers in the business. Author Reputation Press Publishing. So if you have a book that you'd like moved, do yourself a favor and move it through ARP. And you can find out more information on them at authorreputationpress.com. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Dan, first and foremost, welcome to People of Distinction. And thank you for being a guest. How are you?
I'm very well, Benji. Thank you for having me here. It's my absolute pleasure to be with you.
Wonderful. Well, listen, the pleasure is all ours, and we're very much looking forward to the education that we're going to be able to receive. Now, Dan, I know we have so much information to cover, but before we jump into the book, let's hold off slightly. Start by articulating to our listening audience a little bit more about yourself, please.
Well, I certainly was raised in quite a dysfunctional family. And I know a lot of people could say that because dysfunctional families, they vary in manifesting styles, but certainly not in toxicity. So everybody's story is unique and different, but I said up front in the book, this is based on internal first-person experience and awareness, and what I've come to learn about the long-lasting effects of growing up in a family that is truly dysfunctional.
Absolutely.
So I am in a place now where, oddly enough, I do therapy, very unusual kind of therapy. I'm a vocal therapist. So I work with people with voice disorders. I work in a voice center attached to a large teaching hospital. And I discovered over the years of doing clinical work here that there are a lot of parallels between people with voice problems and people who are raised in dysfunctional families. That sounds a little bit unusual, but, every childhood has an outcome, and every voice problem has a source. And so every problem we have, we can trace it back to a source. And, the first most important thing to do is be able to recognize what that source is relative to the problems you have now in your life, whether they be problems in relationships, problems in social exchanges with people, problems with coworkers, and just the things that happen to you in your life that are frustrating and aggravating that other people don't seem to experience. So that's kind of where I started with this book. How do I recognize everything and tie the two together? Not that I was trying to tie every problem and frustration I had with my upbringing, but I really started looking at things about, what was not right in my own life and what things kept happening over and over. And where does this come from? Why do I think this way? Why do I feel this way? Why do my emotions work this way? And I made some interesting discoveries, and I knew I just had to put them down in this book because I know it's not just me.
Absolutely. And what a great place to start, Dan. Starting from the ground floor, basics. How does one delineate between dysfunction and just adversity that is being faced, trials and tribulations that they encounter when it comes to their family? How do you really see that? Is it something that you have to wait for years down the line and you see the effects and work backwards? Or is there something that you can see in the moment and recognize that dysfunctionality?
A little bit of both, actually. Yeah. I mean, as we get older, one thing to keep in mind is, when we're kids, our minds work very concretely, not abstractly. So it may take a while to recognize that what becomes normal to us can just be alarming when you look at it retrospectively and when other adults are looking at it. So again, what we go through, any kid can see his or her parents have a fight. There can be some occasional family drama. That's fine. But when it's just the common steady diet you get of this stuff and how it molds your very personality, your communicative skills, how you interpret people's meanings, their words, their actions, what your communicative style becomes. It all gets kind of warped. And that's, it's like you go out into the adult world with a different operator's manual, and it just doesn't serve you. And you face these frustrations and aggravations that you'd never even saw coming. So it sneaks up on you. When you talk about growing up in a really dysfunctional family, it's, again, that steady diet of trauma, of drama, of fights, of, public humiliation, of, any kinds of, you can just, name your poison. There can be spousal abuse, there can be physical abuse, there can be substance abuse, there can be narcissism, there can be competition between parent and child. There's something going on with the people in charge that just infects you, and you don't even know it because it's just your everyday experience. Not, when you go out into the world as an adolescent and then as an adult, you get hit upside the head and just wonder, what is going on here? Why do I have these experiences, that everyone else doesn't seem to have? So recognizing those and just putting a name on it can be the first really helpful step in being able to transcend those effects.
Absolutely. Dan, your book talks about restructuring dysfunctional into productive and fulfilling. How does one go about accomplishing that?
Well, to know that, first of all, and I talk about this in the book, and I don't mean to wax spiritual too much, but, one of the most important things to consider is that, we're so much more than just our mere human biology. We're born, but don't we come from somewhere else? Even the most hardcore, scientific minds are recognizing that there's a greater intelligence at work here in the world and beyond, and, behind life itself. And, you can call it whatever you want. I mean, I happen to call it God, but there's all kinds of names you can put on it. But recognizing you came from a source, a higher power, and learning to make connections with that higher power, and you can transcend those effects because you start living from a different place. We get used to feeling, so much less, less important than others, less worthy, less talented, less capable, less lovable, and on and on and on. And, that's trained into our minds from a very young age. And that stuff carries over into adulthood. And so to transcend those effects, we have to realize that a meaningful, fulfilling life is not going to come looking for us. We have to create it. So it's not about certainly not erasing the effects, but learning to really recognize them and then move beyond with specific practices that are based on 2 or 3 different kind of arenas. One is spirituality. Another, what I found out, this just got a lot of really interesting parallels, is the various mind-body practices out there. And oddly enough, as I alluded to before, my work as a voice therapist, because a lot of people I see, it's very interesting that they have backgrounds very similar to mine, that end up as problems right in their larynx, and they don't have a voice, quote unquote. That's both metaphoric and literal in some cases. So we can talk further about that. But the main thing is, if we don't have that anchor point of a solid, stable home, and the norms of healthy child rearing are basically violated, we go out into the world with, kind of socially and emotionally with one hand tied behind our backs. And it just doesn't have to be that way.
Mm-hmm. Dan, this is remarkable. I mean, it's so illuminating hearing you talk about this, and especially with your work and your background and how you've been able to establish these connections. Now, a term that you utilize often in your book is other than normal. Articulate to our listening audience, Dan, what does that term mean in your estimation?
Well, it certainly doesn't mean abnormal. That's one distinction I want to be very clear about. There's normal, and normal is very nice, but it just wasn't everybody's experience. And then there's abnormal, which suggests some sort of pathology. And the pathology wasn't ours as the products of these families and homes. The product was, I don't know. I don't want to use the word diagnosis, but the problem started with the people in charge. The effects, came upon the children. We had to go out. So there's other than normal. as opposed to normal in terms of what we had to witness, what we had to cope with and manage when we were far too young to even know what we were having to manage and far too ill-equipped. It's like we were fighting above our weight class from a very young age. And so, picture yourself coming home from school in the afternoon and having to pick up your inebriated, passed-out parent up off the floor. That's other than normal. Picture, your family's reputation preceding you when you go out the door every day and getting snubbed or picked on or pitied, from other people, your classmates or the other adults in the neighborhood. That's other than normal. The problem isn't the kid. The problem is who's raising that kid. And again, I want to be clear that it's not a blame game here that I'm playing here. There's no blame, there's no benefit to gain from blaming. But we do have to recognize that our experience, we had a lot of elements of normal in our house, of course. It wasn't 24/7 or it was chaos and melee. But chaos and melee became the norm enough to where it really had an effect on us. And I mentioned in the book up front that it's like being in the emergency room. You look around, you see everybody got there in different ways, but here we are all in the same place, looking for help in the same place. And that's kind of what this book is about, to recognize your other than normalness and not call it abnormal as if you have some sort of pathology or diagnosis. Just recognize there are adjustments to make so you can redirect your life away from how your childhood trained you and how you've trained others to treat you over the years.
Guys, again, here on the line with Dan Sherwood, we're discussing his fantastic book, The Scars You Don't See, Moving Beyond the Challenges of a Dysfunctional Family. Available for purchase through Amazon, Barnes & Noble. Make sure to look into the audiobook that's available through audible.com. Dan, I love what you're saying. And it again, as I was saying before, it's illuminating in so many ways. And, an example that I know of, and a very close friend of mine, I remember having a conversation with him, and this was years past, but, when we were talking about relationships, and he was talking about his relationships with significant others and how I always, I remember having conversations with him and I always looked at him and I was like, listen, man, you're too aggressive in certain moments. And when it came to significant others and the way that he would fight and be borderline verbally abusive and just overly aggressive in those moments. And having that conversation, and I think through it illuminated his past and how his parents dealt with each other and the way that they would fight and yell at each other and some of the things that they would say. And he always kind of, after a while, it became normalized to him. And he looked at it in a way of, this is just the way they show love. So they still love each other and it's totally fine that they're yelling at each other, that they're verbally abusive to one another. And that, of course, was reflected in his relationships. So it's very interesting hearing you say that. Now, Dan, follow-up question to it. In terms of any of our listening audience members that are out there that recognize some of these dysfunctionalities, some of this dysfunction in their own lives. Now, of course, we know, guys, there's only one way to get all of the tips. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, that's where you have to go. You have to purchase the book, get everything that Dan has comprised and put together for you. But since we have you here on the line, any tips that you can offer for any of our listening audience members that are out there that recognize some of this behavior in themselves, but want to grow and move past that, where would be a great starting point for them?
A great starting point would probably be to enjoy some silence once in a while. People talk about, meditation and mindfulness and all this stuff. But sometimes, it's when we're in our quiet moments that we can start making some realizations and get out of that kind of victim mentality that we often carry with us out of these types of homes. It's interesting, as you mentioned, love and what we learn about love. Because I have a couple of sections in different chapters that I talk about that, where the way what we learn about what love is supposed to look like and sound like and feel like is insane. It's like a crazy roller coaster ride where a nice calmly, rising to the top and then whoo, down you go and getting violently jerked around. It's just crazy. But know that it all starts with being able to love yourself. And before you can love yourself, first you have to like yourself. And that's a challenge. So know that you can like yourself. You can look in the mirror and like what you see, because you can learn to treat yourself better. So start in those quiet moments, where we just sort of reflect on things and just keep our mouths shut and listen to whatever that still small voice is inside of us. And if once we can get ourselves in a nice calm state, when we just connect with our breathing and get ourselves out of any kind of fight or flight mechanism and get that rest, digest, heal mechanism going in what's called our parasympathetic nervous system, we're a lot more receptive to ideas and things like visualization, seeing where we want our life to go. We can close the gap between where we are now and where we think we should be, where we see and interpret everybody else is, and we're trying to play catch up. So I would say start in the silence. That silence is your own kind of private, quiet place where you're not going to be distracted, and you can really, literally visualize. Close your eyes, breathe calmly, and visualize not just who you are, but who you want to be. And realize that you can start being who that person is right now, the minute you open your eyes again. Wayne Gretzky, the great hockey player, always wrote that, I don't know if he wrote it or said it, but a good hockey player plays where the puck is, and a great hockey player plays where the puck is going to be. So why don't you play where the puck is going to be? You start in any small way you can, right? I always use myself as a bad example, standing in line at Starbucks every morning, waiting to order. And I say, all right, well, here I am. Wherever I go, there I am. So any opportunity in these little low-risk kind of exchanges, I can be, somebody else, my best self that I visualized. So you can start overcoming things. It's interesting. We don't grow out of this dysfunctional mentality like we did, outgrew the toys and we played with as kids and the clothes we wore. Sometimes it just manifests in new ways, but we can overcome that in just little small ways by visualizing and acting on that visualization and low-risk opportunities, and start just changing yourself from within in just daily interactions. And if you make that a consistent daily practice, it builds and builds and builds. And I talk about several things to do throughout the book to make that happen.
Dan, as we start to tie up this fantastic interview, I want to get to something that you started to talk about earlier in the interview. And you were mentioning, of course, your work and your career, and how you noticed within a lot of your patients, they had similar backgrounds in terms of dysfunctionality that they had experienced that led to either, their lack of a voice, and I think you said metaphorically, or, legitimately, like actually losing it. Talk to our listening audience, in addition to what you experienced through your career, what type of research did you do in preparation for this book to be able to come to some of the outcomes in which you've established?
Well, I have a quick two-part answer to that. One, I read and read voraciously. I read everything, not just from my own profession. I started there because I wanted to be the most well-rounded, clinician I could be. But I started reading all kinds of other things that are, you might think of on the periphery of what my job is. I started studying the human body and the human psyche and the human condition. And I realized that a lot of folks I work with who has voice problems, and I see a lot of people who have really, really tight muscles all around their throat and beyond their throat, all throughout the body. And I see people who have no voice at all. They come to me with just tiny little whispers. And despite perfectly normal anatomy and functions and everything, and we try to figure out what's going on here. And you start digging in, and I realize how many problems wind up in the throat that manifest from somewhere else. Sometimes it's stress. In fact, most of the time it's stress, overwhelming, burdensome stress that just comes out of nowhere. And sometimes that's a manifestation of residues of things that happened long ago, and you get some little trigger and things come about there. So we get all kinds of muscle tensions and problems and breathing problems and psychological problems as a result. It's amazing how things tie together, the way we sit, stand, move, breathe, and talk. It's all informed by who we are, who we became as a result of where we come from.
Is there anything else that you'd like to articulate to our listening audience that we haven't yet covered during the interview?
Well, I'll tell you, it's when you come from a place where you weren't respected and felt like you belonged in your own family much of the time, you're not going to feel like you belong anywhere. But there's a way to overcome that. You don't have to stay stuck in the mold of your past. It just doesn't have to be that way. It's almost like being built and destroyed at the same time when you grow up in conditions like this. But there is a way to transcend and overcome and be everything you can possibly want to be. You start with that visualization and you become it, and you engage these practices. There's nothing more beneficial than a consistent daily practice. I don't care how small it is. There are things to do that I outline in the book that can be done, and there's more coming. I'm working on a follow-up book right now. But let's start there. You don't have to have this background noise in your head that tells you you're not good enough. You are good enough. You're not dysfunctional. You are exceptional. And let's be that way. Let's get there. You can do it.
There you have it. There you have it. Guys, listen, I think what perfectly encapsulates this entire interview, and really what perfectly encapsulates his book, there are so many gems to be discovered within it. But as he just stated, and I love the phrase, so I'm going to reiterate it one more time, you don't have to stay stuck in the mold of your past. I absolutely love that. It's hopeful. It just really encapsulates the entire journey that you're going to be taking with this book. So there it is. Nothing more can be said, guys. There is so much more that can be. Nothing more is going to be. Okay? You know what you have to do. The onus is on you. Amazon, Barnes & Noble. For the audiobook, go through audible.com. Pick up your copy of The Scars You Don't See by Dan Sherwood. You surely will not be disappointed. Let's grow, let's develop, let's educate ourselves. And it starts with this fantastic book. Dan, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you once again for being a guest with us today on People of Distinction.
I'm honored to be here, and thank you again for having me.